getting coverage from 4 stations in the Denver area of a shooting at a high school.
A still developing situation, and one that looks like it's not going to be over anytime soon.
Horrors like Columbine terrify us, and we need an explanation. So even if we don't have an answer, we find one. And we find it really too fast.
2 witnesses that we talked to on the telephone describe them as members of the trenchcoat mafia.
When we come back, were these boys part of a larger movement? The sheriff's going to investigate. There are angry teenagers turning up in other towns. They are wearing black. They're fascinated with death. They're listening to violent music. They call themselves goths. And police say several extreme followers have attacked and killed before. That story in a moment.
With police saying the boys may have been part of a dark underground national phenomenon known as the Gothic movement, and that some of these goths may have killed before. Brian Ross has been investigating.
What they're thinking is totally irrelevant to a normal person's thoughts.
It's what's known as the Gothic movement, violent and black.
Black relates to the dark side. So Gothics usually dress in all black. They a lot of times put white makeup on their face to appear dead.
A growing and to many troubling trend in suburban America.
I wasn't totally surprised that it happened in Colorado finally. All these things are, to me, are warning signals that something's wrong.
And for the last 7 years, Steve Rickard of the Denver Police Department Gang Unit has been trying to spread the word of how the so-called Gothic movement has helped fuel a new kind of teenage gang. White suburban gangs built around a fascination with the grotesque and with death. His most recent appearance was before students at Columbine High School in Littleton.
Just 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Just 3 or 4 weeks ago. And you're speaking about gang violence?
About gangs and gang violence, how to recognize gang activity.
And Rickard, in a telephone hookup between Denver and New York, says school officials later told him among those who may have been in his audience were members of the so-called trenchcoat mafia, for whom the black coats are what colors are for the Bloods and the Crips of the big cities.
So, like the colors of the Crips and the Bloods, the black trench coat is that same kind of emblem.
To them, I think that was the common denominator that showed everybody at that school that these 10 kids belong together. That's their group, and don't bother to try to join us because we're there and we don't want to be accepted by you.
And Rickard says while the extent of the killing yesterday at Columbine caught even him by surprise, it was not the first time members of such groups in the suburban Denver area had turned to violence. 2 years ago, another Columbine student, said to be part of the trenchcoat mafia, Robert Craig, killed his stepfather and then killed himself. And last year, in another prosperous Denver suburb, Lakewood, 46-year-old Eugene Riddle barely survived an attack by his teenage son, deeply involved in the Gothic movement.
I was stabbed in the chest, yes.
Okay, who stabbed you, sir?
Pull it out.
Sir, I don't want you to pull it out, okay?
Okay.
The knife is still in your chest?
What?
The knife is still in your chest?
Yes.
Okay, I want you to hang on for me, okay, John?
Okay, hurry. I'm not going to last too much longer.
Riddle's son David and his girlfriend were convicted on charges of attempted murder. They were proud, self-proclaimed members of the Gothic movement, and, like the students involved in yesterday's shootings, focused on white extremism and hate.
And what was interesting to me about this kid, in his living room, he had about a 6-foot wooden end table that was carved with various signs, like anarchy signs and Nazi swastikas. He had written about killing somebody and plunging the knife in their body and letting the blood run over his hands, and how that made him feel so fulfilled.
Where are those kinds of ideas coming from, do you think?
I think in his case, you can trace it right back to Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson is a man, once called Brian Warner, who combined the names Marilyn Monroe and Charles Manson for his stage name. His violent, controversial music performances have made him a prominent figure among goths, as they are known, a rebellious role model for the 90s.
There's kind of a cult that follows him, and I think that he was looked at him like a god.
Meanwhile, we're finding out much more about what went down at midday yesterday in Littleton, Colorado. The emerging details, I promise you, chilling in the extreme. According to surviving students, the killers, this Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, hurled insults at blacks, Jews, Hispanics, and athletes during the bloody rampage. "All jocks stand up," one of them yelled. "We're going to kill every one of you." The other looked at a black teenager in the face, declared, "I hate niggers," then fired 3 shots into the kid's face. A young girl begged for her life. A bullet ended her heart-rending pleas. One gunman looked under a library desk and shouted, "Peekaboo," before he blasted his classmates. One can only imagine the chaos, the confusion, fire alarms, strobe lights going off amidst the shrieks of panicked youngsters. A terrified eyewitness says that this deadly duo, quote, thought it was funny. They were like, "Who's next? Who's ready to die?" And every time they'd shoot someone, they'd holler like it was exciting. Another survivor agrees, quote, "They were laughing after they shot." Incredibly, one student who describes himself as a former friend of these killers today revealed that one of them spared his life just moments before the murders.
I walked over and I was like joking with him, like, "You weren't in third hour, man. We had a test today." And he said, "I don't think that matters now." And I was like, "What?" I was like, thought he was like acting weird again. And he said, "Brooks, I like you. Get out of here. Go home." And I was like, what the hell? But I know not to screw with him because he's really not the nicest person in the world. And so I started walking down Pierce and I started hearing gunshots go off. I thought like someone was doing construction at first, but then I started hearing explosions. I was like, "Sheesh."
You know, I hear that, Janine Ferris-Perot, crime-busting DA from Westchester, and I believe that there were kids who knew something. Maybe that kid only knew in the minutes before it happened. Even there, I didn't hear a call, the alarm call. Even there, I didn't hear the red flag go up. Even there, I didn't hear a 911. Even there, I didn't call, "Hey, principal, you better know something's about to happen here." I just think that there's more to the story.
I don't think there's any question that there is, and we hear from so many of the students that there were no early warning signs, and yet today I heard one of the students say, "Gee, they finally did it." He said that was his reaction after he heard about it. But just moments before, he said, no, there were never any signs. So I think that what we need to do is try to piece this thing together, and I think we'll find a lot of early warning signs.
And Jack Levin, Professor, when you hear who the pathology, who the kids are, who their backgrounds, and you say, "Hey, I heard this story before."
Well, you know, we heard this story a number of times, and Geraldo, you know, I've studied the mass killings over the past 20 years. But typically, we were talking about middle-aged guys in their 30s, 40s, 50s, not kids. The motivation, revenge, to get even, to go on a suicidal rampage, and then before you kill yourself, make sure that you've killed everyone responsible for your personal problems so that you, the people you think have made you miserable. That's something that we've always associated with adults. Now, teenagers, an 11-year-old boy in one case feels that he was jilted by his girlfriend and gets even with her by killing her. And in this case, we've got organized outcasts. We've got a whole group of people who feel that they've been teased and harassed. These are marginalized and alienated young people.
Manson, who was appearing tonight in Grand Rapids, Michigan, would not talk with 2020, but he has denied being a racist or a fascist. Outside the concert hall, his fans talked about the Gothic movement and what happened yesterday in Colorado.
I just think that they got sick of people just like making fun of them, and I think they had something mentally wrong with them.
And because I listen to Marilyn Manson, it doesn't make me a violent psychopath. It's going to go kill my family.
Now we're going to get blamed for a lot of reasons like this. People are going to start blaming
the music.
Blaming the music. Blaming the clothes.
All Gothic young people are not the same. There's like the Gothic scene where kids are just dressing the part, listening to the music. I bet you would be hard-pressed to find any suburban area in the nation who isn't affected somehow by suburban groups like the Gothic movement.
There have been a series of violent episodes around the country linked to teenagers who called themselves Goths. Just last November in Burlington, Wisconsin, police say 5 students with ties to a so-called goth group had planned to storm their high school heavily armed, take the principal hostage, and kill student and faculty targets. 2 of the students involved got scared, and the police became aware of the plot. Ron Jandura is the superintendent of schools in Burlington.
The students had targeted the building principal, the assistant principal, our police liaison officer, the teacher, and each of the 5 participants had a personal list of students that they had also targeted. The sum total was approximately 20 people.
Later, in a confession, one of the students involved said the would-be targets were white students who they thought were acting too cool as if they were black.
We don't want to be kids, you know, they're upper class, middle class, you know, white kids in small town towns. Yo, what's up? Can't wait, chocolate.
With traditional gangs, their enemies are pretty well defined. With suburban groups, their enemies are not defined. I think everybody's their enemy. And I think anybody, not just the jocks wearing hats, or not just minority people, anybody who would get in their way, I think they potentially would kill.
As police officials throughout Denver and its suburbs today were consulting with Steve Rickard about what steps to take next, he says it is now clear to him that when he spoke 3 weeks ago at Columbine High School, the shooters were no doubt already planning their attack for April 20th, the birthday of Adolf Hitler.
I think that based on how complex the whole thing was, how it went down, I think it was being planned for many months.
And being planned by more than just two?
I would think that it'd be hard for me to imagine that no other associate of these two suspects would have been aware.
And yet no one seemed to have picked up on the trench coat mafia as a real threat, including you, Sergeant.
Well, that's true. I think they're saying, look, this is, here we are. You're never going to forget us now. Now we're something. We're in history now. We've killed so many people that we're going to be never forgotten.
As we said earlier, Marilyn Manson says he's an artist and in no way a racist or a fascist. When we come back, today in Littleton, a town in tears, how will they ever be able to make sense of what happened?
Kids can make the awkward, the geeks among them, feel like Martians. Even the guidance counselor films of 40 years ago were concerned with the outsiders.
There are many people like Ben, people with problems, people that we reject and ignore because we don't understand why they act as they do.
In Littleton, we know now that some of those outsiders banded together, dressed alike in their long dark cloaks, listened to the same dark apocalyptic music, and together nursed their same dark hatreds and frustrations. They are not alone in teenage America.
Teens are attracted to anarchy and rock music that talks about anarchy because their deepest wish is to have total freedom.
Christina Ferrari is the editor of Teen People magazine.
Every generation has its Marilyn Manson. And basically, teenagers love to shock people. For most kids, it doesn't go any further than that. It's really the rare kid who has deeper emotional problems that is not going to be able to draw the line between a song and reality.
It is a different teenage culture. What didn't exist in the 50s was pornography at the click of a mouse, lurid websites with a dank reek of Satanism. We asked a Dateline staffer to browse through some search engines, and within seconds, he found recipes for making pipe bombs and worse. And then there are the video games that play out the most violent fantasies. And so do popular movies aimed at young audiences, like the current Matrix, in which actor Keanu Reeves, in a long dark coat, blows away cyber bad guys. And some people have noted similarities between the 1995 film Basketball Diaries and the killings in Littleton. In a dream sequence in that film, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, also wearing a long dark coat, slaughters his classmates and a teacher.
There used to be a time where if your kids played videos, they played videos. And if you watch the ratings of movies, that would be enough. And I think that it takes more vigilance now as a parent because you are ultimately responsible for the influences in your kid's life and because ultimately you have to discuss it with them.
Dr. Kopowitz believes there are between 8 and 10 million children in the country suffering from psychiatric illness. Not an epidemic or a threat to public safety. But nearly all, he believes, show signs of trouble that could be picked up very early and treated if only schools had mental health monitoring systems in place.
The thing that's so disturbing about this group is that they really blatantly told the schools something's up. They wore a costume every day. They were nasty to other people. They talked about guns. They were telling all the adults around them, all the authority figures, something's up here.
But nothing ever happened until the day they came back, apparently, with explosive devices and the weapons.
I don't think there's any fault here. I don't think it's a bad school or bad parents or bad kids even. I think that there's a problem in recognizing that psychiatric illness is real, that lots of kids suffer from it, and more importantly, having a system that works.
The way the families who lost children in those Paducah, Kentucky school shootings believe that media violence did in fact inspire the killings there. And this month they filed a $130 million lawsuit against several entertainment companies, including the makers of the film that we just saw a portion of, The Basketball Diaries. There's been no comment from the filmmakers on that lawsuit. Joining us now from New Haven, Connecticut is Professor Greg Loken. He specializes in juvenile justice, and coincidentally, he's from Littleton. He has two nieces who attend another high school in this community. Professor Loken, I know that everyone will say we never thought that it could happen here. But the culture of violence that teenagers in America know now knows no boundaries, does it?
It doesn't, but I was completely shocked because Littleton's my hometown, a beautiful place between mountains and high plains that you just don't think of as being a target for this sort of thing, but a lot of us know that it can be today.
Are school teachers and administrators and especially parents simply not aware of what their kids are doing, seeing, reading, what kind of messages they're exchanging on the internet these days?
I think a lot of parents don't have any idea what kids can find on the internet. They don't know what their kids can see on a television set at a neighbor's home. They don't have control over many aspects of their kids' lives. And in this case, we see kids who don't have strong social ties, who have committed prior offenses, who have perhaps some involvement with drugs and certainly with delinquent peers, and these are all markers of future violence.
Dr. Greg Loken, thank you very much, reporting tonight from New York. We'll be right back.
Still ahead, schools used to be safe havens, but more are becoming danger zones.
Have we gotten to the point where every high school or middle school in America needs to have metal detectors or x-ray machines?
How can we protect kids from kids? Next on our Dateline special, Killing at Columbine High, the death of life.
Something really, there's something that sometimes that the parent culture doesn't understand about the youth culture, and that is children developmentally have a tendency to see things in starker, more split terms as good or bad, evil or good, you're for us, you're against us. We sometimes take for granted, because their behavior mimics adult behavior, that they, like us, have more wisdom about the issues and about how you have to blend good and bad. These kids, it seems by the early account, had so demonized, had so constructed in their mind that you're us or you're them, and they were enemies. That's very dangerous. You don't get to that point overnight. A lot of factors played into that.
Dr. Miller. Mr. Thomas, were there any warning signs at all that anybody picked up? I know, obviously, in hindsight, people have said to you, oh, my goodness, I should have told somebody about the fact that these kids did this or said this or that, whatever.
Well, I think there were warning signs, but the warning signs that we see in a lot of kids today. These kids were isolated from the mainstream. They dressed unusually, but, for any of us that have been in the system for very long, or, even just citizens, you see kids today and they don't dress the same way that we used to dress, and they have pierced body parts, and it's very difficult to really see what those signs were that we could predict this behavior.
He used his computer to keep a website through which he communicated with his buddies in the Trenchcoat Mafia gang. He posted violent lyrics from a German techno music group. He posted this, a scribbled drawing with a Satan-like figure and features that seemed to portray violence. He posted this, a recipe for making pipe bombs, and it's detailed and chilling. He talks about how effective pipe bombs are, saying, pipe bombs are some of the easiest and deadliest ways to kill a group of people. America Online, AOL, shut down the website late last night. In his online profile, Harris used phrases that are used by people who play the computer game Doom.
A California computer game designer told us Doom calls on players to use pipe bombs, frag bombs, and shotguns to kill all the other players. A year ago, this teenager, Brooks Brown, ran afoul of Harris at Columbine High School. Harris then used his website to threaten Brown's life.
He's big on that. They're all big on that. They're all big on, like, anti-God, Satanism. They're really just pure hate is the way the entire group is. I know all of them. I'm acquaintances with all of them. I wouldn't say friends, but, I mean, I don't, like, reject them, but they're all, like, hateful.
The witnesses that we talked to on the telephone described them as members of the trenchcoat mafia. These are kids they claim routinely dress in black trench coats.
Kids were watching this on TV. And also, it was the early days of cell phones. If they weren't seeing it, their friends were watching it on TV, calling them on their cell phones, and letting them know.
They were saying that that they wanted to do this for their revenge for the school, I guess, because, I mean, they're such an outcast at our school.
It was this little round and round feedback chamber. So when a kid goes on TV and says, oh yeah, they were outcasts, another kid who doesn't really know the killers well or at all thinks, oh, they're outcasts. Oh, I didn't realize that. Then when he's interviewed, he says they're outcasts. So you're contaminating the witness pool like that.
And speculation about a black-coated mafia and its supposed grievances ran wild.
A gang that apparently hated athletes.
It was all because people were mean to him last year.
The Trenchcoat Mafia is more than just black clothes. These boys were dangerously strange.
In a yearbook photo of some group members that was broadcast nationwide, neither gunman appeared. One member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, John Savage, said there was a good reason for their absence.
Eric and Dylan were not at all a part of the things that we did as a group. They didn't hang out with us. They weren't Trenchcoat Mafia at all.
And he says the media's description of him and his friends had little basis in fact.
The Trenchcoat Mafia was like, we were video game nerds. We sit around the table and, play Dungeons and Dragons, which is just about the least dangerous thing you could do.
It was a group of friends that had similar interests. Some kids referred to them as the Trenchcoat Mafia, but it was not that it was an organized club.
But the explanation about outcast loners seeking revenge against bullies had the dual advantage of being both dramatic and familiar.
What happened here at Littleton is a grotesque distortion of high school fears and rivalries involving cliques, the in-groups and out-groups that are a part of teen life in America.
Author Dave Cullen spent nearly 10 years on his account of Columbine, researching police records, the killers' diaries, and their lives at the school. He said the boys had busy social lives and didn't seem motivated by bullying.
There was lots of bullying at Columbine. It was a high school in America. Did it have anything to do with driving these two boys to murder? I cannot find any evidence of that.
The killers directed their hostility toward the whole student population, placing propane bombs set to go off in the cafeteria at lunchtime. But the devices failed to detonate as planned.
Columbine actually wasn't a successful shooting. It was a failed bombing. How much more indiscriminate can you get? 2 big bombs to kill everyone who happens to be in that part of the building at the start of a lunch.
Cullen describes the killer's motives as a cocktail of malice, self-loathing, and a craving for fame. Over time, they became something like a two-man cult, bent on making their mark on the world in one final act.
It was a murder-suicide for both of them. For Eric, it was primarily a murder. For Dylan, it was primarily suicide.
What they're thinking is totally irrelevant to a normal person's thoughts.
It's what's known as the Gothic movement, violent and black.
Black relates to the dark side. So Gothics usually dress in all black. They a lot of times put white makeup on their face to appear dead.
A growing and to many troubling trend in suburban America.
I wasn't totally surprised that it happened in Colorado finally. All these things are, to me, are warning signals.
It basically started out like with the killing of animals. Then there's always the heavy metal music, and drugs don't help. Sometimes I felt like I was the master of my own body. Like something else kind of took over with inside of my mind.
What took over?
Just the violence, the devil, lust and greed for drugs, for money.
He gradually withdrew from family life. That is probably one of the main things I noticed. He even got to where he avoided eating meals with us. He listened to the music, heavy metal music.
But after Jason shot them all with the .25, he went back to the van for the other gun and said, quote, "They're still fucking alive." Jason then walked back and finished the family off with a 9mm. After the murders, Joseph Reisner claimed that he got into the van, closed the door, and began to cry. He apparently said to himself, "They're all dead." Another source claims that after the murders, Joseph and Jason hopped into the van laughing together. Jason then tried to turn the radio on and said, "I've got to hear some Marilyn Manson," but the stereo didn't work. Jason Bryant had an entirely different story. He claimed that Joseph Reisner and Dean Mullins committed the murders, and that he had to close his eyes because he couldn't bear to watch.
It is heartrending, when you see all the young children who've been murdered, quite frankly. And what's happening here is you have so many of these young men in particular who grow up in homes without a father figure, and the first authority figure that they run into is the police or someone who's badder than they are. And, they learn habits and things that really are not conducive to thinking about other people and thinking about the welfare of other people. And our society is breaking down in terms of the family values that you pass on. It's almost politically incorrect to talk about family values and about doing the right thing, because then someone comes up and says, "Well, which family are you talking about?" That's not right. There was a congressperson last week who said that a lot of this violent behavior is induced by the fact that people are poor and people are hungry. Give me a break. I grew up around a lot of poor and hungry people, and they weren't like that. So we have to stop making excuses, take some personal responsibility, and we need to work with these young people.
And so there was a belief in God, and it was defined primarily by the Bible, so there was a kind of cultural morality that survived a long time in America, and it was showing up in elections 20 years ago, 15 years ago. There was still a consensus. We remember the moral majority, the religious right. They were still able to get people elected, still able to have some clout and some power. Let me tell you something. Gone. No more. There is no more cultural Christianity. There is no collective Christian consensus that is going to have any power in this country whatsoever. In fact, the more distinctly Christian we are, the more we will be labeled as extremists, bizarre, alien, homophobic, intolerant, guilty of hate crimes. Cultural Christianity is, as we know it, that kind of consensus coming from a biblical understanding is gone.
No matter what politicians and celebrities in Hollywood and the majority say or do, it will not change the word of God on this issue. Our responsibility as Christians is to stand firm on the eternal and unchanging living word of God and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, so that those who are in bondage to that sin may be delivered, may be justified, and may be washed of their sin.
Christ. If politics is an arena, this arena has pushed God out of the picture.
Amen.
We have false paradigms, right, left, conservative, liberal, right, Democrat, Republican. That's a false binary. The choice is Christ or chaos. Woo! It's Christ or communism. Whoa. And so whenever Jesus taught, John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one gets to God but by me. People need to know that. Philippians 2, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. And so my job in this race, not only to defend the Constitution and represent the fine people of this community, I am bringing the gospel directly into politics. I'm doing it with the zeal of a former infantry officer. I'm doing it as a Bible thumper, King James Bible guy, and I'm bringing it right at people in a loving way that brings the truth in direct conflict with the chaos of the day. And I believe that's important, Jesus taught in John 17:17, sanctify them by thy truth. Thy word is truth. People need to know the scriptures. People need to know about Jesus. And there's too many people that have designed our political discourse to push God to the side. My job is to bring him right through the front door.
Is spiritual warfare. And we are now in the Normandy landing of spiritual warfare. The Democratic Party is possessed by preternatural evil. It is not a human institution anymore. It is an instrument of wicked spirits. This is demonic. Our enemies are demonic. There's no turning the other cheek. There's no being winsome. There's no compromise possible.
And I want to be clear, just theologically, because in the past, if you don't clarify these things, people misinterpret them. Well, folks, we're not saying that these people are demons. We're saying that they're being used by demons. And we need to understand that at the heart of all this, this is a spiritual battle. There's no other way to make sense of it. If you're solving for X, if you know how to do algebra, you solve for X. You don't even need to believe in God. This will make you believe in God. This will make you understand. When you look at this, you say, there is no other possible explanation. If I connect all the dots, it doesn't make any sense. Greed, politics, nothing could account for what we're seeing except something genuinely, spiritually dark and wicked.
Prosecutors argued later that the bodies had been arranged into a cross. This would fit into their concept that the murders were demonic and ritualistic in nature. Deputy Morgan claimed, quote, "My opinion is they probably didn't fall that way. It didn't look natural."
The following are 12 steps to assist parents with children involved in the occult. First, don't view their interest as just another phase. Know the danger signs. Determine their intensity of involvement. Look for significant changes in their personality. Become aware of what influences the youth subculture has on your child. You must regain control. Have authority in the home. Don't hesitate to confront the issue. Get help. Seek counseling for the entire family. Remove the negative influences. Detoxify your home from occult influences. Get involved in your child's life. Positive peer groups should be encouraged. You need to become positive parental models. And communicate. If your child is involved in the occult, it's time to build bridges, not walls.
Good evening. Who brought the pedophile?
Okay, first of all,
hold on.
You have to wear masks.
No, thank you. Who brought the pedophile?
It's not optional.
We want to know.
You're required.
We want to know. Well, we're medically exempt. Thank you, though. Who brought the pedophile? I just want to know.
The story time is actually for children.
It's for, well, then why is the pedophile here?
So if you guys could please...
Why did you, no. We want to know why there's a pedophile here. We saw videos of what thing does. Yeah. Why did you, hey, it's got videos. You allow pedophiles in here. Do to little children. Yeah.
You are...
Why did you allow the pedophiles? On YouTube of what it wants to do to little children. Why did you bring the pedophile? I don't understand. I don't understand. Children. Yeah, then why would you bring your children to a pedophile? We're not swearing. Yeah. It's not vulgar language. Hey, you should be ashamed of yourself. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Tell me, what is wrong with you? Pedophilia. What is wrong with you? This is sick. This is sick. You guys should be disgusted. Call them. There's a pedophile here with children. Call them. This is disgusting. What the hell is wrong with you people? These poor children. What is wrong with you sick people? Get out of here, you pedophile. Get out of here. You're not safe here. Get out of here.
This is truly nuts and threatening to the future of the United States.